Welcome back to What Am I Doing? A series of videos about decision making in Splatoon 3. If the algorithm missed that it's a series and recommended this to you instead of the first entry in the series, you might want to check out part 1, where I defined weapon roles and explained what I mean when I use the terms Anchor, Slayer, Skirmisher, and Support. Silly algorithm. It determines my entire livelihood, and yet it can't tell I'm making fun of it on the very platform it lords over. Now that we have those terms defined, I'm going to talk about how the 4 ranked modes are played, explaining how different kinds of weapons can be used to coordinate with the rest of the team to score points. We're starting with tower control because the objective is very simple, and it's a great case study for illustrating a concept I'll be using throughout these videos, which I will call the objective line. I'm going to start with some very simple ideas, most of which you probably already know, but we'll quickly move past them to get to some more interesting insights. Splatoon 3 maps are all symmetrical. Knock on wood, Splatoon devs, please stop bringing the salt spray problem back. And the tower starts in the very center of the map. The tower is moved by standing on top of it, which a player can accomplish by painting the wall and swimming up, or by jumping to it from higher ground. The team that controls the tower has improved special charge while they control it. The tower does not move faster with more than one player riding it, with the exception that you clear checkpoints slightly faster. If players from both teams are standing on the tower stays in a neutral state, not moving in either direction until no more than one team is on the tower. Specifically, the tower moves along a preset path marked in a neon color on the floor of the map, a path that, like the map, is completely symmetrical, the same for both sides. When one team is in control, the line changes color to their ink color, and when neither team is in control, it's a different neutral color. If a player leaves the tower or is splatted on it, the tower slows to a stop quickly, moving 1 or 2 more points worth if it's currently moving, and then stays still for 5 seconds. If no one reclaims possession of it during that time, it starts returning to the middle of the map at a slower rate than it moved when someone was riding it. Remember these details, they'll be very important for understanding the tactics we'll go into later. In set map-dependent locations, the tower reaches checkpoints marked by a square on the tower path. At a checkpoint, the tower stops moving while the checkpoint is cleared by scoring. Once the checkpoint is cleared, the tower can move straight through it for the rest of the game, saving a lot of time for the team in control. If a checkpoint isn't cleared before the tower either changes possession or starts resetting to mid, there's a short amount of time the pushing team has to reclaim it before this gray layer appears over the heads-up display. Gray means that while you are still awarded the points for making it that far through the checkpoint, in attempting to get any further, you'll need to sit all the way through the checkpoint again from the beginning, instead of being able to pick up right where you left off the way you can if you get right back on. If the tower is pushed to the very end of its track, the team that pushes it there wins by KO. Otherwise, the winning team is the one that pushes the tower the furthest before time runs out. Like the other ranked modes, tower control has an overtime system. Overtime triggers when the clock runs out, but the losing team has control of the tower. If the tower starts returning to mid, the enemy team gains control of the tower, or the losing team gains the lead, overtime ends. That should be good enough to get started here. Now obviously, the objective is eventually to push the tower, but at the very beginning of the game, doing so would be a mistake. In any game mode, tower control included, playing the objective puts you at a disadvantage in a fight. In Rainmaker, you're given a slow-moving, slow-firing main weapon and denied the use of subs and specials. In Clam Blitz, a power clam reveals your location. You also have to look up to aim at the basket, which cuts your peripheral vision, and throwing clams creates a short window where you can't fire any weapons, leaving you vulnerable. In Splat Zones, painting the zone leaves you in the middle of the map, near what everyone in the game is going to be looking at, standing up out of your ink, a relatively vulnerable state. And when the zone is transferring from one team to another, that can be seen on the heads-up display, so it's impossible to cap the zone totally stealthily. In tower control, getting back to the topic of this video, the heads-up display shows the state of the tower, whether it's neutral, like we see here, or controlled by one team or another, in which case it will be a squid icon with that team color's ink on it. And text flashes on screen showing changes in that game state. If an enemy player is riding the tower, The game tells you about that very explicitly, and since there's so little space on the tower for them to paint and so little cover, even if they try to hide, it's very easy to find them and they'll likely be splatted if the opponent gets to engage the tower directly for very long at all. You can get a little bit of mileage in a pinch by painting your feet quickly and moving so that you can use the pole in the center of the tower to block shots, but opponents should eventually be able to track you down, especially if they know to pressure opposite sides of the tower at the same time. Throwing a suction bomb on one side of the tower and shooting the other, or pre-firing the opposite side of the tower as your teammate, are both very consistent ways of clearing it that beat this tactic quickly. It might work if you're trying to stretch it just another few points to get lead at an important moment, but you are going to be splatted for it, and it's not a tactic that you should be using early in the game when the lead you're getting probably won't hold up. We need to push the tower, but doing so immediately is likely to result in the opposing team splatting the tower rider, having numbers advantage, and being able to push the tower in the opposite direction further than we were able to. So instead of pushing the tower immediately, we want to get an advantage over the other team first, so that when we push the tower, we still have enough resources to keep anyone from getting close to the tower while we push it. To put it another way, you prevent your opponent from exploiting the disadvantage your teammate is at from riding the tower by setting up a defensive perimeter around the tower that stops them from getting close to your teammate in the first place. If an opponent trying to defend is getting shot at before they're able to get in range of the tower, they can't attack the tower rider, and the push can keep going. This means you're going to need the non-tower riding players to be in position to keep the enemy back. It also means they need enough of an advantage over the enemy team that they're not just going to get run over for being there, and that they can actually keep the enemy team back. There are a lot of different kinds of advantages, as I discuss at length in my Splatoon 2 video, How to Get Out of S+ rank. The thing is, every advantage is temporary, and only certain advantages are significant enough or last long enough that they'll enable you to do something as slow as get the tower through a checkpoint before you meet resistance and end up at a disadvantage for having someone riding the tower. The most important advantage is numbers advantage. This is what most competitive teams are going to play for, since it's very reliable and gains you more time than any of the other advantages as long as your team capitalizes on it. If your team splats 2 members on the enemy team, now even though one of you is riding the tower, compromising their ability to help as much in fights, you still have a 3v2 numbers advantage over the defenders. So you should be able to keep them off the tower as it pushes. Some other advantages to consider, though, are special advantage and positional advantage. If you have a 4v3 numbers advantage, but none of your team has their specials ready and the other team is waiting with missiles, a booyah bomb, and a trizooka ready to go, you probably want to bait some of those specials out before you hard commit to being up on this little platform. If you have 4 players on the map, but you're at the tower, and the other 3 of you are someplace else, the enemy team can push the tower until your teammates reach you, because your team isn't able to use their superior firepower to control the places on the map where the tower can be attacked from. This brings us to the concept of zone control, like I've discussed in various videos before. Your goal in tower control is to control the zone around the tower and the zone where the tower needs to move to next. If you can keep opposing players outside that zone, it's safe to push the tower and you can score. This concept helps illustrate why it's usually not a good idea to have multiple players on tower. The fewer players that are out in front making the tower push safe, the smaller the zone in front of the tower they control, and the weaker they control it. Also, with 2 players in almost exactly the same place, they can both be attacked by the same player. A single bomb or charger shot can take multiple players off the tower at once if they all try to crowd on top of it. The only time players might want to do this is when they have overwhelming map control and they want to speed the tower through a checkpoint just a little bit faster. Now, since the tower moves, the zone that's actually important to control is shifting. And what really often separates competitive players from casual players is how quickly and effectively they make decisions based on what zone is actually relevant to controlling the tower in that moment. At beginner level, players may not even realize that the enemy team is pushing the tower into their base, taking fights in completely irrelevant positions on the map. At a competitive level, a player will quickly identify exactly when they will have sufficient numbers and resources to be able to counter an enemy tower push, project where the tower will first be in a place on the map that's vulnerable to attack once those resources are assembled, stealthily get into their weapon's optimal position to attack that spot on the map, and be on top of the enemy team in perfect coordination with a teammate's special as soon as that opportunity comes. As the defending team, it's very stressful watching points tick down, but resist the urge to try to do something about it before you know which team has an advantage. If it's a 4v2 in your favor, and one of their 2 remaining players decided to jump on the tower in mid right in front of you, yeah, punish them for that error. But against experienced players, they probably won't make beginner mistakes like that. They're probably going to wait to get on tower until they think it's safe for them to push it. Make sure you know where the tower rider's teammates are. Consider whether they know where you are. See if you have enough teammates nearby to support you. Don't just rush in without at least checking the heads-up display to see how many gray X's there are on each side. If you're in a 1v4 and you attack the tower rider, they'll splat you if they position to control the zone around it and don't, completely whiff every shot they fire. Then, when your teammates respawn, they'll still be at a numbers disadvantage until you respawn. So what could have been a 12-second wait before your team can defend turns into a 24-second wait or longer. If the team hard engages on your 3 teammates with their numbers advantage that they have because you're down, and their likely special advantage, because your team got splatted and you lose special charge for that, they may be able to get some splats in that 4v3 fight they're taking and stretch it out even longer. So even after you respawn, now your team still can't defend. This is a spiral I call the feed stagger loop, and it's usually the way that a team gets KO'd in Splatoon. To avoid this, always have an awareness of the heads-up display so you know which team has the numbers advantage in that moment. If your team doesn't, be willing to back up and give up space. Even if you think you can win a 1v1, chances are higher than usual that the player you splat has a teammate nearby that can trade back, that is, splatting you while you splat their teammate, and maintain the numbers advantage they have. You're also less likely to have a player of your own nearby to trade you back after this happens. Better to back up a little, stall for time, maybe by throwing bombs or something, but make sure your teammate has a safe super jump back in and don't hard engage until they're back to help you. As the attacking team, remember that every advantage is temporary. Positional advantage changes as soon as players can move and change positions. Special advantage ends once the special is used. Even splatting opposing team members, the most consistent and reliable method of gaining control of the objective, only gives you about 12 seconds before the opposing player has time to respawn and super jump back into play. Against smart players, you'll have a shorter and shorter window to play the objective before they're able to bring their full force of 4 players to bear on the tower. So it's important, 1, to recognize your advantage state and use it for the short window that you have it, and 2, to recognize when that advantage state has ended and disengage until you can create another one. This is where that mechanic about the tower comes back into play. Remember how we talked about the fact that it stays still for 5 seconds before slowly returning to mid? 5 seconds is a long time in Splatoon. That's half a respawn timer. You can do things with that time. If the tower is starting to push into a zone that your opponents control, a zone that you don't have a strong enough defensive perimeter around, you don't have to keep riding it. Hop off for a little bit and jockey for position a bit. Give your teammates time to push in front of the tower and make space for you. Get a special and launch it before you try again. If it starts returning to mid, have someone hop on and then back off to give your team another 5 seconds. Even if it starts returning to mid for a little, it's going to do that slowly. You have some time to catch it, and it'll still be closer to where you want it to be than it would be if it stayed in mid. If you keep the tower where it's at, even if you can't get anything done and you have to give up the tower and retreat, the enemy team will have to wait for the tower to get back to mid, and you'll be alive to harass them as they try to inch it forward. You'll also give yourself the best chance of actually breaking through and scoring more. If you just stay on the tower and go down with the ship on a doomed push, Now the enemy team has enough of an advantage to rush into mid and get a push of their own going right away, and that kind of momentum can help them start staggering your team. The only time it's a good idea to push the tower into space your team doesn't control is if you just need a few more points for lead and it's a lead that will likely win you the game. If they have a score of 13 and you're at 17 and there are 25 seconds left in the game, yeah, you tower dance and pray for them to miss just long enough that you reach that 12 you need. But if there are 4 minutes left in the game and they have a push to 87 and you're not even going to clear first checkpoint, chill out, their lead doesn't matter that much right now. Checkpoints do change this calculus a little bit, because a checkpoint lets you make faster, safer progress on future pushes. So I'd consider getting splatted to break it unless the checkpoint is easy to break and we'll have no trouble getting it later, or I'm very confident we have a shot at going even further than just that checkpoint on that push. Checkpoints are usually the best places to set up to defend against a tower push, because the rider won't be a moving target. The movement won't mess your aim up, nor will the tower bring the rider out of your weapon's range or behind cover. It's also a very visual, obvious point on the map, and even in a solo queue environment where players can't communicate very well, people are generally more likely to defend there, so it helps with coordinating with the rest of your team. Finally, defending at a checkpoint forces them to remake progress they've already made if they want to get the tower any further, because a successful defense at a checkpoint puts that gray indicator on the timer in the heads-up display that we talked about earlier. Now that we've talked about the general strategy of tower control, we'll talk about the specifics of how different weapons are best suited to playing it. I like to analyze maps and modes by using an abstraction I call the objective line. The objective line is the path your team travels to gain progressively more control over the map so they can push the objective more and more. The point on the objective line is where the objective itself, in this case the tower, happens to be. In tower control, the objective line is very simple. It's just the tower path. It gets a little more interesting and a little more abstract in other modes, but the same analysis still applies really well. As a Slayer or Skirmisher, your job is to clear the space around the objective first. No point in being pushed into the enemy base if the enemy team can just super jump to a teammate to bypass you and get quick access to the tower anyway. Once the tower is clear and there aren't any glaring holes in your defense, then you need to start pushing further down the objective line to make it safe for the tower to advance. If you're behind the point on the objective line, it's defenseless from the directions your opponents will be coming from. And if you're too far ahead of the point on the objective line, someone can ignore you and slip past you to stop the tower without a fight. So wherever the tower is, you want to be controlling the radius in front of it in the way your weapon does best. If you play 52 gal, you might just set up a wall on open ground and enforce the zone from there. If you're a roller, maybe you shark under a ledge and enforce it that way. Whatever capability your weapon gives you, you'll use that to defend that space. So exact positions will vary, but the bottom line is that if an opponent enters this space around the tower, they should be getting shot at by you as soon as they do. The support and anchor are typically the weapons that will ride the tower once the team gains an advantage. This is because these weapons are weaker than Slayers and Skirmishers at pushing, that is, moving forward quickly to take fights directly. Anchor weapons need specific positions with long uninterrupted sightlines, and in some cases time to charge their weapons to have advantages in fights. So there are some situations where they're going to be very poor at moving forward in enemy territory to create space. That doesn't mean you'll never see a Hydra flank, just that it can't do so reliably in anywhere near as many situations as a 52 gal can. Therefore, the 52 gal is more likely to go out in front of the tower to force enemy players back or splat them. Typically, the support player and anchor on a competitive team will discuss who will be riding the tower on comms. In some cases, an anchor will have more of an impact toward defending the tower rider by being able to take a position off the tower, so the support takes the tower. But at other times, the top of the tower may be a position the anchor can use reasonably well, so they may take it and have the support player run a little further ahead and help the frontliners with their fights or watch a flank angle. They also might trade off if one of them has a special that will be valuable to use and requires them to position off the tower to get full value out of. The two will usually still position relatively close to the tower, so that if one of them gets splatted but the team trades it back or still has control, the other can rotate to the tower and continue riding it. It's important to remember that this kind of planning is very specific to coordinated competitive play, and you cannot expect it to work quite that smoothly in solo queue a lot of the time. What you can do, though, is look at your team comp and determine which weapons are most likely to take the tower. If yours isn't one of them, when your team gains an advantage, promptly push in front of the tower to indicate that you don't intend to ride it yourself. If yours is, and someone you'd rather have pushing up in front of you has taken the tower, among more experienced players, getting up on the tower with them gives them the hint, and they get off, leaving the riding to you. If not, well, play from off the tower as best you can. Like we've established, the only time it's at all useful to have more than one player on the tower is when going through a checkpoint, and usually that small amount of time saved still isn't worth the risk of losing control of the map by being a frontline weapon short. So if they're not going to go up and do the job they're best suited to, you'll have to do your best to fill in. In solo queue, you also just may not have a weapon in your team comp that's great at doing a job that needs to be done. Double backline comps are rare in competitive play, but the game will give them to you all the time in solo queue, leaving your team with few players that will be able to do a great job of pushing forward and forcing opponents out of contested spaces. Now, fortunately, when the game does this, it usually puts the other team in the same awkward situation, so they're on somewhat even footing. But sometimes it's not the most balanced. Do the best you can at your role, but if you can clearly see that your team is lacking in its ability to push forward, or that everyone's pushing forward and no one's playing the objective, remember that your only real role is whatever the team needs me to be doing right now, and try to figure out how you'll be the most impactful, regardless of what I or anyone else has prescribed in guide videos on YouTube. If the support player has time, painting up in the zone the tower is pushing through helps a lot for giving their teammates escape routes back into mid, so they're harder to remove completely from play, even if the tower isn't making progress. Whatever support special they're farming should be ready to go right when the opposing team starts to resist the push, so the big bubbler lets you cruise through a checkpoint, or the missiles fall right when the opposing side wants to start running at the tower. From off the tower, the anchor's job is to help control the contested area on the map from a distance. They may help protect their frontliners in fights by engaging from a safe distance to cut off an opponent's angle or splat them while your frontliner skirmishes. They may watch a potential flank angle that the frontliners aren't in position to watch, but that may also be a better idea for the support depending on its capabilities and the angle it has to watch. If things start to go south, remember that your job as an anchor is to stay safe. Only fight from strong positions and give your teammates jumps back in when they're splatted. If you're at a numbers disadvantage, the enemy team will move toward you on the objective line, and you can't let them get in range of you when they do. On defense, Slayers and Skirmishers are the weapons most likely to physically push forward to start a committed engagement to try and stop the tower. Usually, it's unwise to just rush in. The enemy team probably has special advantage and has had more time to set up. If you've just spawned in, you may not know how far they've advanced on the map. Remember that the enemy Slayer and Skirmisher's jobs in this situation are to push forward and create a defensive perimeter around the tower. If you get tunnel vision on the tower, you'll just run into that perimeter without knowing where the enemy frontline is and get shot. Take your time, collect as much information as you can on enemy positions so nothing surprises you when the time comes, throw bombs to stall in the meantime, and have special if you possibly can. But it's also unwise not to commit when a teammate commits, or to let a support special get used without following up on it. Once the team is going in, you're most likely to succeed if you all commit to it, instead of just letting that single teammate's efforts fall harmlessly in the face of 4 enemy players. Once your team has a special or 2 to get started with, get in there and make something happen with it. Much of the same advice applies for support players, though you're much less likely to be the first player in running and gunning to start the fight. You'll more often clue your team in to initiate with a well-timed, well-targeted special, and otherwise play the game of painting for special and throwing bombs to stall until then. Anchors on defense should already have a pretty good idea about where they're going, because there are only so many positions on the map that work for you, fewer that are going to be good for controlling that particular checkpoint. You're probably deciding between at most 2 different positions to defend from, so once you can see the tower is going to be at that checkpoint by the time your team is ready to push back in, you need to move proactively to one of those positions and get set up. Get there and get behind whatever cover you want to play from. Get special, set ink mines, get charge ready, do whatever you have to do so that you're ready to have an impact once that fight starts. Rotating too slowly in response to where the enemy team is on the objective line puts your team effectively a player down when it comes time to engage, especially if you retreat so slowly that you just get chased down and splatted. Whew, that was a lot of information. While tower control is one of the simpler modes with an objective on very clearly marked rails, there were a lot of concepts we covered that now I won't have to reteach when it comes to future modes, so hopefully that'll speed things up when it gets a little more complicated. Squid bag all over that subscribe button if you want to make sure to catch the next entry in the series, and consider checking out my links in the description. I am trying my best to make content creation my full-time job, and to that end, I have a Patreon and a Metafy account, which are great options for supporting me while getting, in the case of Patreon, some input on the future content I make, and with Metafy, private coaching. There's also a Squid School Discord server with plenty of new Squid friends to make, and other Squid teachers with expertise in different areas than my own to ask questions of. I have a Twitter where I announce when I go live, as I stream on Twitch and YouTube, both of which are also linked below. Finally, I'm on TikTok. That app frightens me. Thank you all so much for your continued support. We'll see you in part 3 to talk about the next game mode.